U.S. officials claim they know the types of the drones and cruise missiles used in the strikes, and even know where in Iran they were launched from. So far, none of that evidence has been released. David Martin reports from the Pentagon.
U.S. officials say experts have examined pieces of the wreckage on the ground in Saudi Arabia, identified the specific type of cruise missiles and drones fired, and determined they were made in Iran. Other analysts have traced their tracks back to points in southwestern Iran. One official called it a complex and coordinated attack involving 24 drones and 9 cruise missiles. Although Vice President Pence stopped short of saying flatly it was Iran.
Yesterday, it's certainly looking like Iran was behind these attacks. Our intelligence community at this very hour is working diligently to review the evidence.
Iran appears to have found a gaping hole in Saudi air defenses around their most valuable asset, oil. Saudi Arabia relies on U.S.-made Patriot air defense batteries, but they were all pointed south toward Yemen, where past missile attacks have come from. The missiles and drones that hit the oil facilities this weekend came in from the north. The U.S. has Patriots of the zone and an air base in the middle of the country, but they were too far away. Having been unable to prevent the attack, the U.S. warned it might retaliate.
We're locked and loaded, and we're ready to defend our interests and our allies in the region. Make no mistake about it.
The U.S. has been locked and loaded since last spring when it sent an aircraft carrier and B-52 bombers to the Persian Gulf. But Joint Chiefs Chairman General Joseph Dunford told reporters the president has not yet asked for any military options. For now, the most concrete consequence of what Secretary of State Pompeo called an unprecedented attack on the world's energy supply is that President Trump said he'd prefer not to meet with Iranian President Rouhani next week when world leaders gather at the UN. The most urgent concern here is to erect better defenses around those oil facilities because U.S. intelligence had not expected this to happen, had not expected Iran would be so bold as to attack Saudi Arabia directly.
Ian Lee has the view from Saudi Arabia. Secretary Pompeo is due in Saudi Arabia tomorrow. He's expected to meet Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in a diplomatic show of support for the embattled country. This comes after that devastating attack on the Saudi oil field and the world's largest crude oil processing plant Saturday that knocked out 50% of the country's production. A senior U.S. official tells CBS News that Pompeo will get the Saudis' view of what they think ought to be done. Saudi Arabia reached out to other countries in the Gulf to find out what they want to do, so the U.S. will get that perspective also. There's also some good news for those at the gas pump. Saudi oil minister said earlier today that the kingdom's oil output was back to pre-attack levels after the country dipped into its strategic reserves. He even said that no deliveries had been disrupted and that damaged facility will be back at full production by the end of the month. In Afghanistan, the Taliban is claiming responsibility for a pair of terror attacks in Kabul. Charlie Daggett is there.
Packed crowds had gathered outside an election rally for President Ashraf Ghani when a motorcyclist plowed into them and blew himself up, killing dozens. Police told us many victims were women and children. Ghani and his entourage were unhurt and continued campaigning. A second Taliban suicide bomb struck at the heart of America's presence here in Kabul, only around 200 yards from the U.S. Embassy and military headquarters. The Taliban were quick to claim responsibility for today's bombings, which ended the lives of at least 48 people, delivering on a promise to up their attacks after U.S. peace talks were brought to an abrupt end.
Remember, this is a terrorist organization President Trump intended to invite to Camp David to sign off on peace talks, openly claiming responsibility for killing dozens of civilians in the worst attacks since those talks collapsed.
One of the most pressing questions in the Middle East is what to do with the thousands of ISIS fighters who've been taken prisoners of war. Holly Williams visited one high-security prison in northern Syria and spoke to a U.S. citizen who traveled to Syria to fight for the Islamic State.
This is the first time they've allowed a camera crew inside this high-security prison, home to 5,000 ISIS captives, including ISIS leaders and the men who built their deadly bombs, according to the guards.
Hi, are you American? Of course.
It was not where we expected to find a 22-year-old from Minneapolis. Abdelhamid Al-Madioum agreed to tell us his story, but we can't know for sure whether he was speaking freely. He told us he was recruited to ISIS through a contact on Twitter.
He said, "Do you want to speak to someone in ISIS?" I said, "Yeah, of course."
He was bombarded with ISIS propaganda videos, he told us, not the ones showing gruesome beheadings, but explaining that ISIS was helping Muslims. He says he entered ISIS territory in 2015, hoping to become a doctor.
How did they treat you?
Pretty much, they gave me a blank check to buy whatever I wanted.
Did you not know that it was a terrorist organization when you joined it?
To be honest, I was kind of a conspiracy theorist a little bit.
Yeah, but it's a terrorist organization, Abdel. It's a terrorist organization that's carried out attacks.
Here's the thing. People like me that see this, that first of all don't really believe the news.
You heard him right. He thought ISIS terrorism was fake news. Like many in this prison, he claims he was never an ISIS fighter. Instead, he says he was a victim. He told us he lost his arm in a US airstrike.
Both my legs were broken.
Others here also have terrible injuries. Some are children. But there's no question this is a dangerous place. The guard showed us this attempted prison break from just 4 days ago. They want foreign governments to take their citizens home so they can't escape and rejoin ISIS insurgents. Abdel claims he was interrogated here by FBI agents who said he could face 15 years in prison in the US.
15 years is a very long time for mistakes you made coming to Syria.
So you feel you deserve to be forgiven?
I would say that.
ISIS may have lost control of its so-called Islamic State, but these men have been left behind. And it's often impossible to tell who amongst them is still dangerous. Holly Williams, CBS News in northeastern Syria.